Hello and welcome to our webinar, Caregiving from Afar, Tips for Long Distance Caregiving. My name is Mike Bias. I'm with the Alzheimer's Association, and before I introduce our guest speaker today, I'd like to let you know that in the bottom left-hand corner is something called the Q&A pod. Now, in the Q&A pod, you can type in anonymously your questions or comments for our speaker today. And toward the end of our hour together, we'll take those questions and comments. So if you have anything that you'd like to share or ask, please feel free to type them into the Q&A pod if you're joining us live. If you're watching this as a recording, well, obviously that won't work. Um, uh, the other thing is at the left of your screen, you'll see our PowerPoint presentation, and that is where you can see a picture of the person in the webcam below me, and that is the Reverend Esther Hurlbert. She's a registered nurse and an ordained minister, and she comes to us with a lot of very good experience um, uh, to talk about long distance caregiving. Um, in addition to being an ordained minister, she's been in geriatric care management for about 25 years. She spent many years caring for her own parents who lived on the other side of the country. So long distance caring is something that is obviously near and dear to her heart. Esther believes that with careful planning and management and collaboration, that care managers can minimize the trauma of aging and replace it with the hope that our last days can be enjoyable as our first. So, welcome, Esther. How are you?
Well, I'm well. Thank you very much for having me today. This is a topic that's near and dear to me. Um, I've been in the shoes of the people registered for the program today, um, and it's been quite some time since um, my parents died, but the memory of that process remains very clear to me. Um, I visited them often. And this was before cell phones, and this was before being able to Skype, those types of things. But I don't know that that makes a heck of a lot of difference in that not being in their physical presence and not having the immediate control over the circumstances. I always felt like I was on, that there was I was always felt like I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Um, so out of that experience, I've tried to create ways to help families minimize that anxiety of not always being present.
So, I've got to ask you then. You use the word trauma, and I'm imagining that it's kind of traumatic for the caregiver, mom or dad or whoever is all the way across the country, or maybe just 3 or 4 hours away. But I can't just get in the car and run over to help.
That's right.
So, what is how do you what do you suggest that people do with that? Because I think, like you said, it's traumatic. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're waiting for the phone to ring, and then when the phone does ring, there's not a whole lot you can do,
Well,
and it's got to be a feeling of insecurity.
I do think that there are some things that we can do. And before we get into those particulars, we can talk about some of the feelings involved in for the long distance caregiver. But I do think that there are some very concrete things that can be done to help deal with situations that might arise. So people know who's in control, who has the authority to make decisions, who has the authority to guide their care. I can offer some very concrete suggestions in that regard. So you do feel like you can guide and direct their care even if you're not physically present.
Well, I've seen your notes, and so I know what's coming, and I'm really excited about that because so often, uh, you know, you spend 90% of your time describing the problem, and people are like, "Yeah, I know it's horrible," and then there's no solutions, and clearly that's not the case today because you've got some very concrete steps that you can take to not just make yourself feel more empowered, but to be more empowered and more in
Absolutely.
control,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's critical.
Yeah. And
Well,
fortunately, today technology allows us to do that a little bit more efficiently. Yeah.
mhm. So, on our first slide, you say the needs of the caregiver and care receiver are of equal importance. And a lot of people might say, yeah, whatever. But most people, I think, have this visceral reaction to that. because they're like, well, no, no, my mom has to come first, and she raised me, and she cared for me all those years, and mom has got to be the priority. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about guilt, and let's talk about the caregiver shortchanging themselves.
Well, I had to learn this through experience and also listening to the stories of an abundance of clients over the years um, about how to accomplish everything. And we also have an abundance of caregivers who are not only dealing with aging parents or aging relatives, but they're also dealing with adult children. They're also dealing with grandchildren. So there's a crunch in the whole caregiving dilemma that one person might be, quote, the primary caregiver. Um, so before we get into the details of the discussion, I want to say that the needs of the primary caregiver are every bit as important as the needs of the care receiver. And that is not a selfish comment. That's not born out of something selfish that my needs count. We were not raised to consider our own needs. So if we look at it from a different perspective, as a real pragmatic, um, logical perspective, rather than an emotional or spiritual perspective, if anything happens to the primary caregiver, the care receiver is the first one to suffer. So, I mean, from a logical perspective, we find the truth. It's just harder to approach that from a spiritual and an emotional perspective because we are not taught that our needs matter. So I can't repeat that enough, that the needs of the primary caregiver are every bit as important as the needs of the care receiver. I also want to reframe the whole concept of primary caregiver because I'm of the mind that there should not be a primary caregiver. This is a team approach. This is a community approach. And to consider that there's only one person that's in charge or one person that bears the sole responsibility is an unfair expectation of the primary caregiver. So it's more of a team approach, and it really takes a community to take care of somebody with dementia or some chronic needs. So while yes, technically there is a primary caregiver, I'd like to reframe that, and it's more of a community approach than it is a one person bearing all of the responsibility.
Hmm. Yeah. Now, so you say that people I think that people can understand intellectually. Yes, my needs are as important as
Yes.
my mom or my father or my grand, and they can, but knowing it up here and really apprehending
Yep.
it in your heart are two different things. And in practice, I think that people don't give enough weight. And so I guess I would just say, as a practical matter, if I don't take care of myself, and I'm compromised, my health is compromised, and we see this all the time with caregivers, well, then who's there to take care of my mom or my dad or my husband or my wife?
And that's why I say that it's a team approach, that we have to start talking about care as a team approach rather than the sole responsibility of a primary caregiver. There can be a leader and a director, but sole responsibility doesn't lie on anyone's particular person's um,
Okay,
shoulders.
well, let me just say, okay, well, Esther, you don't know my situation. That may be true in some families, but in my family, my siblings are not stepping up, and if I'm not there to do it, then there's no one else. So it's
Yeah,
all on my shoulders.
yeah, and I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot, and so we'll talk about it a little bit later in the program about how to create a community of caregivers within the community if it doesn't come within your old family, because we we're not the Waltons. I
Hmm.
think the Waltons on TV are a myth. We're not one great big happy family. Families are fractured. Families have arguments. There are people who don't get along in families. And so I can imagine some people definitely feel like it's their sole responsibility. So how can we, and we'll talk about this a little bit, start creating communities where somebody doesn't feel like they're so alone in that caregiving prospect. Um, I think too, it's hard to think in a practical manner when we have or seeing the situation through a thick fog of emotion, particularly guilt. I can't, if I could have a magic wand and just wipe guilt off the map, um, I think what I tell my clients, and I would hope for others, is that we wish that it could be a different way, but we are not the creators of the situation. So I invite, the idea of just laying guilt aside and replacing it with an affirmation. I've done the best I can given with what I have to work with. Um, and so if we can start to minimize the guilt with those self affirmations, I think that would be helpful. I also think what I see in a lot of long distance caregivers is that it's a lonely task, that they don't feel like that there is a community to back them up because, well, for one reason, oftentimes community doesn't. Um, and so we have to create that community in a way to move forward. Um, I also see and hear a good bit of anger. And I think that those feelings of anger are completely legitimate. So often I think we're told, don't feel so angry about it. Well, darn, it is angry. Alzheimer's is a terrible disease. It's perfectly normal to feel angry about the situation. And so not to minimize that, but how not to minimize the feeling of anger, but how to use the anger maybe as a catalyst to figure out ways of being more comfortable with the entire situation. So I think all of these things, feeling guilty, feeling lonely, feeling angry, are legitimate feelings. They're realistic feelings. And naming them, I think, helps because that way we don't have to bear the burden alone. And with growing numbers, exponential growth of people who are long distance caregivers, just knowing they're not in the boat alone, I would hope would be helpful.
So so this is huge, and this is something that I really hope everybody can get is those icky feelings that we don't like to feel, loneliness, anger, and guilt. Those are there, and those are normal. And if you're not feeling some of those feelings as a caregiver, especially as a long distance caregiver, then maybe just maybe you're not being honest with yourself, because like you said, those are very normal to feel. Now that doesn't mean that they're true. Our feelings sometimes lie to us. The feelings of guilt. I'm not doing. I could be doing more. I could be doing more. Well, you can only do so much. So we've got to be careful to give a voice to those feelings so that we can feel them. But we also have to remember that just because they're normal doesn't mean that they're always true.
That's true. Absolutely. Absolutely. So
So
I just say I give permission to feel however it is you're feeling, but that doesn't mean that you can't change the situation with some real practical approaches.
okay,
Um,
so we've set the landscape. We understand now the challenges and the guilt of long distance caregiving, and we're going to talk about some specific things that'll be empowering. And we've talked about caregiving in general, the feelings that if you're not feeling, then you might want to be thinking, are you being honest? Let's talk about your next slide here, the need for honest conversation.
right. And before we get there, you just reminded me of something that in this, we use the term caregiving and long distance caregiving. Perhaps some of that guilt is born because we conceptualize caregiving as being present or doing hands on things. And so, are we really being a caregiver if we're not present? Does that make sense? And indeed, being a caregiver does not mean doing the hands on care. It might be directing the care. It might be using your authority to direct the care. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean solely providing the hands-on everyday care. And sometimes we can assign those caregiving tasks to somebody who's better equipped to deliver it than that we might personally be, while at the same time we are in a caregiving role. So I would want to broaden the perspective of what it means to be a caregiver. Mm. I'm also of the mind, we generally know. We generally know what the care receiver needs. They need attention, they need safety, they need good meals, they need gentle care. We know what the care receiver needs. I want to turn that upside down and make the question, what do you need to be a successful caregiver? And to allow people to make that list of their needs so we can begin our list making for successful caregiving based on the caregiver's needs. It might be respite. It might be money to make a trip to be there in person. It might be somebody teaching us how to use Skype so we can go to a care conference. It could be any number of things individual to that particular caregiver to be a more successful caregiver and to give the caregiver some reassurance that they're doing what they can. So I like to frame the perspective of caregiving from that. What do you need to be a successful caregiver?
Now, one of the first things you mentioned, though, respite, is kind of counterintuitive because the others were almost like a toolkit of how I can be more effective focusing on the caregiver. But you said respite, and respite care is when someone will take care of my loved one so I can get away and get a night's sleep or 2 or 3 good nights sleep and take a break. And I just want to make sure that people didn't gloss over that you're saying that in addition to caring for myself, respite care will make me provide better care for my loved one. So it's a win-win situation. And respite care is hard for people. It's hard for people to take a break because they no, I've got to be there, and I can't take a break, and they run themselves into the ground.
Yeah, and we know what burnout is. I mean, I'm sure there's been multiple discussions about burnout, and it's when you're burned out, you don't make sometimes the most logical decisions too. Absolutely. So I invite people just to make wish lists, make lists about what I need to be a successful caregiver. Because it's easy to make the list of what the care receiver needs. Everybody, that's the easier list. That's the easier list.
Now you say here you remain independent when you accept some help. Now, if I'm on the road to burnout and I'm doing it all myself, it's hard for me to accept help.
Well, I am of the mind that we have stressed independence to our own demise. Not only as people who need to receive care. I've heard it a million times. I just want to be independent. Or the caregiver might say, I just want to do this by myself. I want to be independent. Well, the truth is, we haven't been independent since we took our first breath. We have always gotten by with a little help from our friends. And so we need help. We need to help each other in a multitude of ways, however, at the best we can at any given moment, to be open to that receiving help and giving help as we're able in any given moment. And I'd also like to consider how we measure love and concern. I hear quite a bit, well, if you loved me, you would, ... Or, if they really thought I loved them, I would do X, Y, Z. Well, I'm not sure that that's how we measure love. And I would encourage people to reframe how we measure and consider love for another person. And I am not convinced that our physical presence is always part of that equation. Um, Even sometimes I like to flip this situation um, and ask my clients um, to put their parents in the parent role, even though the parent might have Alzheimer's or dementia, to put them in the parent role and just to say, help me so I can help you. Help me so I don't have to worry about you. Do these things for me gives the parent dignity of being in the parent role. Um, and I also ask my clients to consider if your loved one or your parent or the person with dementia did not have dementia, was just, like a little bug on the wall, listening to the conversation of angst of the primary caregiver about, I don't know what to do, or help me what to do, what do you think your parent would tell you? If they saw your angst of trying to be a successful caregiver, and they might say, ask for help, receive the help, that you're not in this alone. And sometimes, there are cranky parents out there. There are parents who want to be as independent as the caregiver wants to be independent. Got their heels dug in. I am not going to change. You can't make me, that whole tug of war. And so my last, kind of trump card is, let me help you get the care you need so strangers don't have to provide that care. Because that's a reality of it. Is it a threat? Is it a subtle threat? Maybe. But it is the reality.
Mm-hmm.
It is the reality. If we don't do this together, strangers can take over. And then you take potluck, and then what do you have? So,
Now, now, why would strangers have to take over? Let's
well,
really
for
be clear on that.
instance, if somebody didn't want to get their legal paperwork together, or somebody said, no, I'm not going to let any care helpers come in my house. You can't make me. I'm going to send them away. Well, if somebody's at risk, any number of people, strangers, could be involved in ensuring that that care format changed. And that's the reality of the situation when somebody's got their heels dug in and won't accept care. I'm talking about the care receiver in these circumstances. I know there are caregivers out there who have parents getting home care, and the care provider goes and the parents kicks them out, saying, I don't need it, go away. So sometimes that thread of reality, let me help you so strangers don't take care of you.
I like that
And
because
sometimes no.
it's real. It's a
It is
realistic
real.
thing.
And sometimes, they can call it a come to Jesus or whatever it is, but this is the reality of the situation. So let me help you make sense of this with people that know and care for you, that you can get acquainted with, rather than have state authorities or any other number of people who might have to intercede if you don't let me help you.
Right. Well, let's look at the next slide over here at those things. Now, I know we've got 50 different states. People from all over the country are listening, and the laws vary from state to state. But in many states, in Illinois, where I am, is one of them, uh, there are powers of attorney for healthcare and powers of attorney for financial matters that are free, available to download from the state of Illinois website. And, they passed a law so that you don't have to have a lawyer to at least get some POAs done.
Right.
Now, you have to check with your state,
That's
uh,
right.
but
Absolutely.
let's
It's not.
talk about what if I sign a power of attorney, Esther. Then that means I've lost all control. I'm not doing that. Are you crazy?
Well, no, I'm not crazy, and no, you don't lose all control. But
Exactly.
I can't stress enough the incredible importance of having the power of attorney document in place. Um, and it's one of those circumstances in which, if you don't have them in place and somebody needs intervention in an emergency, then strangers take over, or the process gets really complicated in finding the next of kin, or any numbers of things. So in preparation and in taking charge for you to be able to direct care, a power of attorney is absolutely essential. Um, Getting people to do those documents and come out of their denial is sometimes a real challenge. But I would put that at the top of the list, getting those legal documents in order. Because in any emergency, a trip to the emergency room, a trip to the doctor, getting information, accessing information, without that, those documents are your walking papers. And so I can't stress enough how important those documents are.
And it's important also to understand that when you sign a power of attorney, you haven't signed your life away.
No,
You
you
can
haven't.
revoke that power of attorney,
Right.
and it can be limited. The limited power of attorney for healthcare. And if I sign my power of attorney over to Esther, Esther can't tell the doctor to do something that I don't want. While I'm still able to
While,
speak on my behalf,
while
I
while you're
outrank.
still capable of doing it, while you're still have the capacity, and this could be a conversation, a huge conversation in and of itself for another discussion about where that line of when the powers of attorney kicks in. And that's why the language in the powers of attorney are so important. What I can say here with assurance is in the absence of that document, you're going to run into trouble of directing care, um, or you're going to get into a big family argument about who gets to direct the care. So, though that whole legal um, perspective of it could be a huge discussion in and of itself, and guiding families in that process. The most important thing to leave here today is do it and work through
Yes.
that process. I also want to make it clear, and this comes out of recent experience. I mean, very recent experience that only makes me remember at other times how important it is that if your parent has dementia and it's clearly documented, um, or um, they're in a care facility, or they might be living at home with minimal kinds of interventions. Make absolutely clear the lines of accountability. And the reason I say this is, okay, so you've got a parent living at home alone, and you might have caregivers come in and go in a couple of times a day to check on their safety, to make sure the stove's not on, to provide a meal, because they might not require 24/7 care. You want to make sure that whoever is intervening to provide the care is accountable to you as the primary caregiver, as the power of attorney, and not to the person with dementia. The reason I say this is because it happens all too often, and the default is often, well, they didn't want me, so I went home. Somebody knocks on the door, the care receiver, you know, says, I don't need you today, I'm fine, go away. The caregiver that you hire leaves, but no one calls you to tell you that your parent didn't receive care that day, because they think that the person to whom they're accountable is the person that they're caring for. Does that make sense? So the line of accountability is essential. And you have far greater control when you talk to the care agency, the care staff, about what decisions and what kinds of intervention your parent or your loved one can decline. There's a big issue, about, of course, we all want people to have choices, even when they have dementia, to have choices. I mean, that's part of our human nature, to have choices and the dignity of choice. There's a difference between deciding if you want peas or carrots, or if you want cake or cookies, or wear your red dress or blue dress, than it is to say, I need to come in to make, I've come to help you today, and decline help. Does that make sense? Because I see it often, and I can imagine that there are folks out there listening that have had that experience, that expected somebody to show up for work to take care of their parents, only to be turned away, and then no one called them to say that no one arrived there to deliver the care. So that's one way you can take charge and know and trust the people acting for you, that if somebody doesn't show up, I want to find, I need to know. I need to know that clear line of accountability. So I think that's essential. I think that's essential to use the authority that you do have to ensure they're getting what you're paying for when it
Yeah, and
comes.
nowadays, with respect to medical people, HIPAA.
Mm-hmm.
So with everybody's heard of HIPAA, and the doctor very well may decide, I'm sorry, I know you're her son or daughter, but I can't share with you the information
Right.
because she
That's right.
hasn't signed the HIPAA form.
Right.
But if you've got a power of attorney, that's a lot different.
It is a
And
lot different. So it gives you, and I really suggest that in those powers of attorney form, the HIPAA language is in there. It just makes it easier, more transferable. But also what people to keep in mind is that, in the absence of that document, for whatever reason, that doesn't prohibit you from telling the doctor something. The doctor can't tell you something, but that doesn't mean you can't tell the doctor something. So even
doctor
if you
can listen.
can't, or the doctor's, the office manager or the nurse saying, or sending a fax or an email to the doctor saying, I know you're not at liberty to tell me right now, but I want you to know this is what's going on in my parent's life. Because the doctors want to know that too. And I'm sure there are folks out there listening that have had the experience of a loved one going to the doctor and they can rise to the occasion and present very, very well. And the doctor believes it hook, line, and sinker when the reality of the situation is something entirely different. So hopefully you do, and you will have that power of attorney and that legal authority to act on their behalf and to establish accountability. But at the same time, you want to give information as well as receive it.
Now, if we've done our homework and
Uh-huh.
we've dealt with our emotions and you're keeping ourselves in check and we get our paperwork, our powers of attorney, and things like that. Now there are some more practical steps, and you call this the Go Pack.
I
Let's
call
talk
it
about the Go Pack.
I call it a go pack. And I call it I named it a go pack a long time ago because it's the information you want to be able to pick up and go with. And I'll tell you, this was born out of an experience 25 years ago in my own family. My dad was the primary caregiver for my mother who had multiple sclerosis. He got very, very ill, ended up in the hospital. There are 6 kids, 6 states. We all come home trying to figure out what to do next, and my dad, in his wisdom, said, everything you need is in the briefcase in the study. And there was our toolkit, and it had all of this information that I put in the Go Pack. And that was a huge gift to me, and it was a huge gift to us, so we could take that information to take care of them rather than to scramble and search for it um, and delay care or decision making. So everything we needed was pretty much in one place. Now, 25 years ago, things were simpler. It's really hard to penetrate the system now. Either they'll tell you everything that they're not supposed to, or they won't tell you anything.
Yes, yes, I've seen that.
So having this information handy. So if you're a long distance caregiver, you make sure that this information is in an envelope on the refrigerator door or that it's in the care facility, that they have all that information handy and that it goes with them to the hospital. And I tell people to put it in the glove box of their car so when they get to the hospital, it's not left on the kitchen table 400 miles away. So you have it when you need it, because this information, your powers of attorney documents, your legal documents, everything about you in one place is a gift. Then you can stand by the bed of your loved one or direct their care and not scramble for the information.
Yeah, it's very this is huge because I a lot of these things. Well, I have it, but
Mm-hmm.
hang on, let me go look it up or let me pull out my phone and it's just not if you've got it all there already. It's just there you go.
Yeah,
You
there
don't
you
have
go.
to
And
scramble.
you've got it. And some of my clients even suggest scanning into your scanning it into your phone. Because then you can email it, you can, do any number of things from your phone. You can send it to hospitals. Now, if your loved one happens to be in a facility, this information, I would say, typically goes with them to the emergency room, but sometimes, in the heat of an emergency, it doesn't. So make absolutely sure when you get that call that somebody's on their way to the hospital that you have this information handy. And it seems insignificant, but it's really empowering because the second they hit there, they know who's in charge. They know
So
who's in
we've
charge.
got 2 pages on the slide there for the Go Pack because there's a lot of things, but some things that dietary restrictions. Wow, you don't think about that, but that's going to be important to know if they're in the hospital. Um, do you have that written down in allergies and so I'm going to go back to the previous slide as well. But list of all the medications. You think, well, that's not a big deal. The doctor has that.
No, they don't.
Which doctor?
Yeah, which doctor? And no, they don't. And I say to even put the advanced directives and the powers of attorney in that packet, because they'll say, well, are they on file? Have you ever tried to find something in a hospital file? You don't know how they file it, and or the computers are down, or any number of things. I just think having those documents, not depending on the facility to have them handy, you're going to be better off to really be empowered by having this information handy.
Yeah.
I want to take a quick step back too about if you are not the power of attorney, that does not mean that you can't have information if the power of attorney grants that authority to you. So it's possible, for instance, your parents might be in a care facility. They can still name you as a person. You can still name other people other than the powers of attorney to have access to information. That doesn't give them the authority to direct care. But, the people in the facilities can still talk to other, interested in it, to keep other family members informed.
I love what you had said about either they'll share everything or they won't share anything. And it's funny because you'd think it would always be the same because of the HIPAA laws, but I've seen that happen. And
Oh, yeah.
and you'd hate to be lulled into this false sense of security, like, oh, they're fine, they're okay, they let me know everything, and then when the time comes, they clam up and they won't share anything with you. And so it's just so important to have these ducks in a row and have
Well, and
this stuff.
we were taught that these are legal documents that need to be protected, like, kept in safety deposit boxes or something. And I say, oh, no, 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 no. These are your walking papers. These documents are meant to be used. So keep copies handy. Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you don't know how to scan it into your phone, find somebody who's a teenager, and they'll be.
That's
that's my that's my answer to everything with respect to technology. Find a teenager; they'll do it in 5 seconds and roll their eyes at you, but they'll do it. It's like the old programming of the VCR. My VCR, was always flashing 12 o'clock because I didn't know how to set the time. Well, you find a young person, and it's very easy. It's
that's
it's
right.
very easy for them.
That's easy.
So
And you know what? And if you don't have an iPhone, make copies and put them in the glove box of your car, or send them to the next door neighbor, or to all the parties need to be involved. You know. Um, so yeah,
yeah.
that information for the people that you think need it, that can be some of the first responders. I'd say let them have it.
Well, I've got to call you out on your prejudice. You said iPhone. Some of us use Androids.
I have an Android. Yeah.
Okay. So, essential information. You wrote here to make sure everyone involved has that, and if this was all scanned and it was emailed to all the adult siblings in the family, everyone's got it. And if you can't find it, it's like, oh, you know what? I can, I don't have it, but you emailed it to me, and they can pull up the email.
Yep.
There it is, and they can.
Yep.
It's there.
Absolutely.
It's there. It's not in a safety deposit box.
Right. Nope. Don't put it there. I've had that situations where we've had to hire an attorney to write a new power of attorney in order to drill the box to get into the box to get the papers. It's ridiculous. So don't.
Yeah.
I also put on here the face sheet. If a person's in a facility like a hospital or a nursing home or memory care unit, in the front of their charts what they usually call the face sheet. And in that face sheet is all the essential information like powers of attorney, hospital preference, emergency phone numbers. Make sure that information is accurate because oftentimes it's not. Or, documents change or um, just make sure it's accurate. I've run into in several circumstances that you think that the information on there is correct. Phone numbers have been, digits have been reversed, or, they've got dated information about people who aren't caregivers anymore. So just make sure that that information is correct. Mm-hmm. And have that handy.
And I like putting that in a clearly marked envelope on the refrigerator door. There's a triad senior citizens group in central Illinois that they call it the files of life, and it's magnetic and it's on a little envelope, and they put it on the refrigerator, and all the first responders in the county know that if they respond to an emergency, especially with a senior citizen, look on the fridge. And
yeah, that's
it's
the
right
easiest place. It's kind of a universal place that everybody's got one, for the most part. So the refrigerator door and, oh, I don't want that information where people can see it. Well, I tell you what, yeah, you do. You do. I mean, it's a safety net. Just consider it your safety net. Mm-hmm. So.
Now, you've also talked here about creating community,
Yeah.
because you can't do this alone. So,
yeah, I think it's important that we share our concerns and information with others in the community. It might be with the pastor at your church or your rabbi or some faith leader within your organization. It might be your next door neighbors saying, this is what's going on at the house. This is my phone number if you see anything amiss. To share that information with others so you'll be tipped off or you'll know if you need to know something. Because sometimes your neighbors, if the ambulance comes, they might know before you do. So any number of people, share it with people you trust so they can help you and be feet on the ground if you need them to be there. There's, and the emergency responders in Lexington now, and I don't know about other organizations, but it's definitely worth checking. In our county, we have what's called Smart 911, and you can create a profile for the address that's associated with a phone number, and you can create that profile so when 911's called, that profile about the individual in the house comes up on the first responders' screens. So they have an idea of what they're going to before they get there. And that, I don't know in other states, but it's worth looking into something like, the Smart 911. Mm-hmm. And then I think, it's really helpful to create community and to create relationship within the particularly facility where your parents might live. And get to know the people, the names, the phone numbers of the people who have the authority to make change. The administrative staff, oftentimes the social workers. Get to know those people and get their phone numbers so you can go to the top to express your concerns rather than the direct care staff. Because the direct care staff, for however well-intentioned they are, tend to change more frequently. They rotate shifts, they rotate floors on which they work. The nurses change. Weekend staff is different than weekday staff. So get to know the people that can make change, that can hear your concern, and to get back with you. Because if you tell the nurse on duty at the end of shift that you're concerned about something, you don't know where that concern goes. Mm. So I suggest getting to know the administrative staff and stay in contact with them. And to stay in contact with them. That doesn't diminish by any stretch the necessity I think, and I do call it a necessity of just, having a relationship with the aides, the direct care aides, the dining room staff, the activities directors, so that when you are there, you, as a human being, person with a personality and the caring daughter, and you get to know all those people and say, here I am, this is how you contact me, I have ideas about activities, that they know how to find you, and that they then, that you're not just a name on a piece of paper with a phone number,
Mm-hmm.
that you're an actual presence, even though you might not be physical present. So get acquainted with those folks in whatever way is possible. Um, you can call the activities director and just say, what kind of activities is my mom in? Or can I send something that would be helpful to engage, and enrich her daily life from the activities? All those kinds of things. You can talk to those people. They'll talk to you.
Mm.
And so it
Yeah.
form those communities. And as we are learning, one of the communities that's probably should be the first responders but are the least equipped are the faith communities. So if your loved one or if you are involved in congregational care, pay attention to the folks who aren't there and ask the people to help you. Visit them, keep an eye on them, keep up with the pulse on the situation, to be there, feet on the ground when you can't be.
Yeah, you said they should be the first responders, but they're the least equipped. So why are they the least equipped? Is it because they're not empowered? Because they're not sought out and asked?
I think, and part of that is just that we don't. Um, I think there's a variety of reasons. One is that we don't talk about dementia very much, and so people with dementia kind of fade out of the life of the community, and when they fade out of life of the community, so do the families and the other caregivers. Um, and for a variety of reasons, it could be shame. It's not that we talk about dementia very much, but I think people don't want to talk about it and acknowledge it out of shame or fear. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And so, as a primary caregiver, even if you're absent, that goes back to the very first discussion that we had, is make a list of what you need. Because sometimes if you make a specific ask, people will help you. They don't help because they don't know what they're supposed to do or what they're allowed to do, or they don't want to interfere. But if you give them a very specific thing to do, they'll do it, and gratefully. But you need to
Yeah.
make the ask. You need to make the ask. And that could be in a congregation, that could be your next door neighbor. Um, so ask and make that very specific request. Would you please visit my mother, once a week? Here's my phone number. Will you just let me know how she's doing? All of those little kinds of things.
So staying involved, initiate rather than wait. Wow, that's you're being proactive. You're
Yeah,
you're
yeah. You don't have to show up in person to be present. Um, so you can ask for all kinds of information and stay in touch on a regular basis. I think it's also critical, um, that you know when the facility is required by law to share information. For instance, in care facilities, by law, they are required to keep the primary caregiver apprised of major changes in condition, medication changes, those kinds of things. And sometimes that information is late in coming. But know by law what information that they must share with you. Um, Sometimes, if indeed you really don't know, or I know sometimes caregivers feel threatened, um, that if they make too big of an ask, or they appear to be overbearing, that the loved one in the facility might take the brunt of that. One, I think, of the best sources of advocacy when you can't be present is finding out who your nursing home ombudsman is. Because that ombudsman is the patient advocate, the resident advocate. They don't advocate for the facility, they advocate for the family and for the residents' needs, and can be completely objective. And if you can't be there, then the nursing home ombudsman can help you. And that's what their role is, and they're kind of on my speed dial for helping families.
So the ombudsman is kind of like the inspector general. And I know here in Illinois, an ombudsman has the ability to walk into a nursing home anytime, 24 hours,
That's
7
right.
days a week,
That's right.
unannounced,
Uh-huh.
and can say, I want to see papers, I want to see documents.
Yep.
They are, they,
They are allowed to do that. And they want to do that. They want to help families. And so if you feel like you're out there alone and you think, I can't go in the middle of the night, the ombudsman, get to know that ombudsman because they're there to help you and they want to. They want to.
so yeah, and we say nursing home ombudsman, but this is not just an employee of the nursing home that is
No,
going
it
to
is
take
not the
care of the
employee of the
nursing
nursing home. It's a totally objective. They're hired by an outside resource. Absolutely.
home.
And
Yes.
it's a Medicare rule that the nursing home have to have an ombudsman. And
Yes.
so they can be a nice buffer between you and the nursing home staff if indeed there's a problem at hand. Um, Also, use other resources within the facilities like chaplains. Many nursing home care facilities now have chaplains on board that can hear you from an emotional and spiritual level need as well, and help direct care. Also know that in care facilities, at least quarterly, there should be a care conference. And just because you can't come to the care conference does not mean you cannot participate. And they're obligated by law to invite you into that care conference. And so you can Skype in if some of the facilities are more up to date. You can Skype in or have a Zoom conference, or at the very least, you can get patched in on a conference call. I prefer in those care conferences to have the direct care staff be there rather than a summary of the social worker or the nurse that gets information secondhand from the direct care staff. Ask that the nurse that sees your mom the most often be at that care conference rather than get secondhand information, because that care conference is your contract that they're getting what they need. So get the most essential information and participate in those even if you can't be present. It doesn't diminish your presence doesn't diminish your authority for participating and directing that care.
And a private geriatric care manager. That's something that you do.
That is something that I do, and it's a shameless plug. Um, but what I find is that sometimes having objective people on the ground, and now there's the nursing home ombudsman, absolutely, that can help you. Um, but sometimes just having somebody with feet on the ground that can help tie the entire picture together can be helpful.
Well,
Um,
there's a tremendous learning curve,
it
and
is.
I, I can go through that learning curve myself, or I can access the skills and talents and experience of someone like yourself, a private geriatric care manager. You've already been there. You know, I
Well,
don't even know the questions to ask,
well,
but
and
you know the
and
questions to
you
ask.
do know the questions to ask. And what I tell clients is that we can help you from spinning your wheels doing something we know won't work.
Yes.
So you don't have to start from scratch all the time. And I think quality, good geriatric care managers won't do something that they can spin off for other people to do for no cost, i.e., the Alzheimer's Association or the Nursing Home Ombudsman or a variety of other outside resources that can be helpers to be feet on the ground to see what's actually going on, to share that information. So it's so the care manager doesn't have like it isn't the end all be all, but is a resource.
Well, speaking of the Alzheimer's Association, I do want to talk about the resources that we have available, which are free of charge. And then we'll come back and ask you to wrap up any final thoughts because we're just about out of time. But the two ways to access the association, the easiest way, and please program this into your smartphone, 800-272-3900. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's nationwide. Trained specialists are always there to answer your call, get information to you immediately, verbally. They can email it to you, or they can put a stamp on it and send it via snail mail if you need more information. Um, the other thing is alz.org is our website, and if you want to access some very specific things, you can type in a direct URL. The first is alzconnected.org. This is an online support community. Think of going to a support group uh, that's online. It's available anytime, day or night. You log in anonymously, so nobody knows your name or your personal situation, but there you can chat and you can read the conversations of other people's, their struggles, what they've learned from the School of Hard Knocks, and what they're feeling. And again, you're not sharing your real name. You pick out a screen name. So it's anonymous, and it's a very, very incredibly powerful thing to be in this online community and talking to other people and finding out you're not alone. alznavigator.org is another site that you can go to, and that's where you can respond to some questions. The website will ask you questions, and then based upon your answers, it will say, well, it looks like you're here in your Alzheimer's journey, and you need to start thinking about these things because this would help you. And coming down the road, as this disease progresses, you need to be thinking about these things. So navigation is very important to get a ship where it's going to go. It's a long journey, and alznavigator.org does that for you in an online format. Or you can call our 800 helpline, and somebody can do that with you in person in a local office, or they can do it over the phone.
Great.
alz.org is the master website. alz.org/CRF, Community Resource Finder. And this is where you can find a list of whether it's nursing homes or assisted living, or you need in-home care, or you need a geriatric care manager, or you need a doctor or a neurologist. You can either just call on the phone, and based upon your zip code, you'll get a list of all the providers in your area, or you can do it yourself at alz.org/CRF, or you can just type in communityresourcefinder.org. And that tool is available for you free of charge. Very important that you understand we have a non-endorsement policy. You'll get a list of all the providers in your area, not preferred providers, and you have to wonder, well, is this objective? Do they have something to gain here? No, you'll get a list of all the providers in your area. So we hope that you'll avail yourself of those resources. And if you can't remember them all, you just call our helpline or go to alz.org, and that's where they're at.
Great.
So just special thanks to Rivers Casino for a generous gift that's helped makes these webinars available. I'm going to go back to the page with our helpline. And Esther, I'm going to ask you for any final thoughts to leave people with.
I would encourage you to remember and do that self-affirmation that on any given day you're doing the best you can and not to be too hard on yourself. And to look through the lists that were provided about ways that you can be present and guide care even though you are not physically present, and to initiate rather than wait. And it never should be shameful to ask for help.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate your expertise and your insights on this. Thank you all for logging in. We hope that you will go to alzwebinars.org and sign up for a future webinar, and also let friends and families know about these webinars. They're very useful for people who are in the Alzheimer's or other dementia journey. So
all right.
Thank you very much, and
thanks
thank you,
Esther. It was enjoyable to be here with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will see you next time.